I'll start with the the introduction and all of that and the briefing and everything, and then maybe by then more people will okay. How many do we have? How many participants do we have at the moment? I think 3. It's a good number.
I think we can get started, Shweta.
Yeah.
And people will join in.
Okay, so good evening to one and all present here today. And I would like to welcome everyone on behalf of RV College of Architecture. Before we start with today's webinar, I would like to quickly tell you about the event. Crossroads of ConverRVsation is a forum initiated by RV College of Architecture to involve alumni across the globe with the current college scenarios and to be a part of various discussions and exchange of ideas. The year of 2020 has been challenging, and the emergence of collaborative practices seems to be the way. The need of the hour is to diversify and combine strategies from a spectrum of other disciplines related to the field of architecture. Given the current situation of the global pandemic COVID-19, we at RVCA see the need to engage with the larger worldview that has an influence on the field of architecture. As a step in this direction, we are proposing to organize webinars for this ongoing semester, exploring the relevance of other disciplines on architectural design. The webinars will enable the exchange of ideas and work experience from allied fields between domain experts and alumni of RVCA who are currently spread across the globe. The underlying theme this year for the series of talks is Facets, Architecture and Allied Disciplines. The intent being to view and integrate different perspectives as multiple facets of architecture and design thinking. From politics of development at urban scales to various forms of art and design, an explorative journey of how and where disciplines intersect and connect with architecture and architects. The webinar series comprises of 5 sessions spread between September and November 2020. Each event will be for a duration of 2 hours and in the form of presentation by 3 speakers, followed by, of course, interaction and Q&A with the audience. Each speaker will have a 15-minute time slot to present. The first session today is based on politics of development. Looking forward to having an engaging and insightful discussion. Thank you. Niharika, Namrata, who's taking over?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Niharika, and Namrata, I think, will be joining us. Yeah.
So we'd like to introduce our first speaker for the evening, Matthew IdicullA, who's a lawyer, researcher, and writer whose work focuses on issues concerning Indian cities and their governance system. He's a research consultant at the Center of Law and Policy Research, CLPR, and previously worked at the School of Policy Governance, Azim Premji University. Matthew has researched and engaged with urban governance issues in multiple capacities for over 8 years and led the drafting of the Greater Bangalore Governance Bill 2018 with the expert committee on BBMP restructuring. He organizes discussion forums on cities and writes frequently on various socio-legal concerns, the opinion pages of India's leading publications. So we're very grateful to have you here and we're very excited to hear from you.
Thanks.
Matthew, will you be sharing your screen?
Yeah, let me see.
Gautam, you can stop sharing. Maybe so.
Is the screen visible?
Yes, it's
Yes.
visible. Can you just make it full
Yeah,
screen?
it is. It is. It is. You can make it full screen if it is possible.
Yeah.
Right. Now? Yes?
Yeah. Yeah. It's working. It's working.
Yeah. Hi, you can all hear me? Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Good evening, all. It's great to be here. Thanks, Salila, for the invite. It's a great opportunity to speak with architecture students and others. I believe faculty members, others are involved. So on the question of I'm obviously out, coming. I'm the only non-architect, I think, in the panel as well as among the participants, I believe. So, but I've been working on urban issues for the last 7-8 years. So, I look at urban governance issues closely, and for this presentation, I've decided to examine housing as housing rights, to be more precise, as a topic of discussion. As architects, I'm sure all of you are looking at housing in different ways, but here I'm looking at the politics of housing rights, the politics of housing rights in India, especially in the context of housing rights of the urban poor. So, and I've titled the talk as "The Right to the City: The Politics of Claiming Housing Rights in India." This is something that I've been working on, researching on in many ways for a few years now. And what I seek to do over the next 15 minutes is to examine the housing crisis in India, the shortage of housing crisis in India, and what are the sort of policy responses that have been there, and what are the problems with some of them, and what can be a better way to sort of address the housing rights question, but not in a very technical sort of way, but understanding the politics of housing rights and what are the multiple sort of challenges that are involved there. So quickly, the housing shortage in India, if as per a 2012 report of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation, India has a housing shortage of 18 million. That is, 18 million households. That is it's almost 2 crore households. And about 95% of that housing shortage is for people from economically weaker sections and people from what are called as low-income groups. Now, this has been an ongoing challenge for many years, but in 2014, the President of India announced that in 2022, when India completes 75 years of independence, every person will have a pakka house with water connection, toilet facilities, electric, 24/7 electric supply. This was the promise, and soon something called the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana was announced, which promised 20 million households, building of 20 million households before 2022. So this is the policy approach that we have of addressing the housing challenges by building more houses. So the key sort of point I want to raise in this sort of short discussion is that what does this approach mean? What is the actual reality of housing in India? Can there be other ways of addressing the housing challenge that India has? And I'll be looking at it specifically from question of slum housing and evictions, and what are possible alternatives to this sort of big building housing model. So what you see here is a typical PMAY housing unit. You've what is usually a 25 square kilometer sort of square housing unit that is being built, and the idea is that you build more and people will come and occupy these houses. You identify some beneficiaries and you provide housing. This is mostly, I mean, this is not just PMAY. I mean, this has mostly been the housing approach of the Indian state. Just build the pakka houses of the nature that I put on screen now, and you'll be able to address the housing challenge. But this is not my figures, but if you look at people who have been researching on this question, they have said that if we have to actually house 20 million households, which is which is about about 100 million people, right? That is 10 crore people. The state cannot just build houses for all of them, right? That has been the key sort of challenge that is there. So on the one hand, there's this promise of building houses of this nature, but what is the state also doing in the meantime? What we see is, along with building houses on one side, you also see evictions and demolitions of informal housing of slums happening on the other hand. Now, this is a picture from the Shakur Basti slum that was there in, and the demolition happened in 2019 in Delhi. 500, households, having, more than, 25,000 people, sort of 2,500 people were summarily evicted. People in Bangalore would be more familiar with this. This is the EWS housing eviction that happened in Ejipura in Bangalore in 2013. This is here also hundreds of people were hundreds of households were demolished. This was to construct a PPP project with Maverick, which is a builder. So what are we noticing here? On the one hand, the state has this promise of building houses. On the other hand, the state has been demolishing houses. What is the connection between these two? How do we understand this in the context of, of what does this imply? What does this indicate in the politics of development? So that's the key sort of inquiry here. So housing demolitions have happened for a long time and continue to happen. Here is a recent report of the Housing and Land Rights Network, which looked at evictions and demolitions over the last 3 years. So over the last 3 years, 568,000 people have been forcefully evicted. 568,000 people, right? 177,000 have been demolished through various schemes of, often for city beautification purposes, right? And in these instances of evictions, resettlement has only been provided for about 26% of the population of the people who have been evicted. So this has been the reality. Just in the last few months during the coronavirus lockdown, when people are actually struggling, 20,000 people in India were evicted between March 25 and July 31, 2020, in 45 different instances of forced evictions. So we see that despite the promise of providing housing, evictions continue. Now, this, how do we make sense of this contradiction, or is it a contradiction? And 15 million people still continue, to live with the threat of eviction. Now, this sort of evictions are not just state-led. I would argue that these evictions are also sometimes court-led. That is not just the government of the day, but even the judiciary is a culprit in this. So I'm here referring to a recent order of the Supreme Court by Justice Arun Mishra, who actually sort of ordered the demolition of 48,000 slum dwellings in a very short order without any explanations within 3 months in Delhi. It said that no court shall even grant any stay, to this eviction order. This happened just a couple of months back. In August 31, the verdict came, and the housing eviction is supposed to be carried out within 3 months. Now, so what we see here is that both the state and the courts have, been guilty of demolishing and ordering the eviction of houses. I've argued that this Supreme Court order is fundamentally and legally flawed for 3 reasons. I don't have the time to get into it. Maybe I can take it up later, because I just want to quickly go through this. Basically, principles of natural justice were violated because the slum residents were not consulted for while this was carried out. So judicial precedents on right to shelter and right to livelihood were not followed. And even state policies and case laws governing housing and evictions in Delhi were not followed by the Supreme Court. So it's a fundamentally problematic verdict. And on top of the pandemic, on top of state-led housing evictions, this is happening. Now, what are the ways you respond to this sort of assault by the state, right? Do we just we meaning people who are concerned about housing rights of the urban poor? What are the ways to articulate a new sort of vision or a new alternative to what is happening? And how do you claim that? That's what I would want to take up now. One frame that has been used globally in urban social movements, especially in Latin America and to some extent in South Africa, is this idea and this slogan called the right to the city, right? And the right to the city is not just a right to housing, but a right to housing is part of this claim. Now, what is most interesting is that this idea of a right to the city has even been adopted to some extent by the judiciary in India, by the Delhi High Court, in the case of Ajay Maken versus Union of India just last year. That case, we already, I remember I showed you the picture of the Shakur Basti demolition. That was the first picture I showed you, where actually 5,000 houses were demolished. And this was without giving any notice. That eviction order of the railways was challenged, and the Delhi High Court held that every person has a right to housing, and no person, whether a person is living in slums or in formal land with housing rights, no person shall be evicted without consulting them. Forced and unannounced eviction is unconstitutional. So before the eviction is carried out, a survey should be carried out, the population should be consulted, and the affected population should have a role to play in deciding what the rehabilitation should be. And slum dwellers should not be seen as encroachers, because that's the term that's used, as encroachers living in illegal sort of, illegally, because they are actually the people who support the growth of the city. And the court actually used the idea of the right to the city. Though it's not a strictly legal idea, it's more a social movement idea, and it's been also adopted in certain UN conventions. But otherwise, it's not strictly legal. But still, the court used it. So this, I believe, offers people who are interested in cities, architects, urbanists, urban planners, others to understand, and it's a pathway. As the right to the city becomes a framework that we can use to make demands and to raise questions of uneven development, right? So what is quickly the right to the city? Yeah. So the right to the city, as it's an idea of used by Henry Lefebvre. He came out with this book called Right to the City in 1966. He said that the right to the city is like a cry and a demand, a transformed and renewed right to urban life. The right to the city is not just restricted to people who are citizens, but is extended to all urban inhabitants, whether they are citizens or not. But let us look at how this, what this means in more detail. I think Henry Lefebvre was, the French scholar, was the first one to propose the idea, but it got more traction when David Harvey came out with this idea of right to the city. He had an interesting article on this, and this is the most famous quote. I've just put it out there. The right to the city is far more than the individual liberty to access urban resources. It's the right to change ourselves by changing the city. But what does this mean in reality? So the right to the city, the nature of this right shouldn't be seen as an individual right in the typical liberal democratic sense, but it should be seen as a collective call for action. That is an exercise of collective power to reshape the processes of urbanization, right? So
Matthew,
what?
just a second.
Yeah.
Just a second. I think we have lost your screen in case you're sharing something.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I
We have lost your screen.
let me just check.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. I was sharing actually. I'm just sharing again. I think it'll come now.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it'll come now. So I'll just continue because I don't want to lose time. I think the screen will
Sure.
turn up now. So what does this idea mean? In actual terms, people have analyzed both Lefebvre and Harvey to say that the right to the city actually deals with two principal is the screen shared now?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's visible.
Yeah. So it is speaking about two different ideas, two different rights. In simple words, it's a very long idea. I don't want to talk about it for take a lot of time for this. Right to participation and right to appropriation. These are the two core components theoretically, conceptually in this idea of right to city. So what does the right to participation mean? The right to participation means that all urban inhabitants, citizens, non-citizens, slum dwellers, non-slum dwellers, all urban inhabitants should play a key role in decision-making processes regarding the production of urban space. That is a term used by Lefebvre, right? The production of urban space, all citizens should have, all urban inhabitants should have a role to play, in the production of urban space. Secondly, right to appropriation. This is a slightly more radical idea. That is, people should have the ability to physically inhabit, access, occupy, and use and produce urban space in the way they want. It's slightly broad. We'll get, we'll see what it means in the Indian context. So anyway, this is just an illustration of what that means. And by the way, the right to city has become a key call for action, and you have public demonstrations that happen in the style. So let's quickly come to India. I just have a couple of slides left. That's it. I'm done with it otherwise. So what does this idea of a right to city mean in India, especially in the context of informal urbanism that characterizes India, right? All of us are trained in formal disciplines, and are talking about things in I'm a lawyer. Most of you are architects. What we talk about, rights, buildings, everything, you're usually talking about things which are mostly legal and formal. But actually, a majority or a huge percentage of Indian people Indian urban residents live in places which do not have formal recognition, formal legal recognition. And the right to the city that the urban poor and people like that sort of access is not through some formal legal means. It is often through informal practices, which can take the shape of negotiations of legalizing, quote unquote, the illegal occupancy that they have, right? Because the process is the way Indian cities are designed has often been skewed against their interests, and they sort of make the claim through not just in India, globally, in the global south, you see that people use tactics and everyday practices to make claims on spaces. And I'm just quoting a very interesting book. This is Lisa Weinstein, The Durable Slum. This is on Dharavi and the right to stay put. So the right to the city in the Indian context is not some big, right about, right to the city understanding, which is about all kinds of sustainable development goals and all of that. It is pretty much a very simple, a more basic right, a right to stay put. What does that mean? It's not just a right to housing, but it's a right against eviction, a right to stay put in where you are. Now, and we'll get to how this addresses the housing crisis, right? That was a thing that I'd initially framed. So, and how does this right, how do people usually exercise this right? So urban residents exercise this right to the city not through strict legal claims, but often through a set of practices which might or might not be legal. So poor groups go and occupy public land. They start occupying it, start building temporary settlements, then incrementally build, all in, obviously not paka houses, right? All informally, they incrementally build on perhaps swamp lands, public lands, and then first they build a house, then they try to get connections of water, electricity. It's an incremental process, and finally they get some sort of legal protection. So it's it's not through the usual means of first you have a land and that is legally protected and then you buy the house. So it's an incremental process of claiming that right, and this is what a lot of scholars have spoken about incrementally building a right to housing, and that is the nature of housing rights, and that is not recognized in law, that is not recognized in policy, and I say that is also not recognized by urban planners, architects, and urban practitioners to some extent, I believe, because we still see everything in very strict sort of technocratic forms. So finally, last slide. How do we sort of given, I initially highlighted the housing crisis that we have, and the fact that the idea now is to just go and build as many houses as possible to to house the poor. But if you look at the examples of this, there are various studies which have shown that many of these housing that have been built by the state have not been occupied. That is, housing is provided for poor. It's supposed to house the poor, but they continue to live in slum dwellings because the place that they build is just a house, not a home. It doesn't have the social economic infrastructure that actually a slum has. We see the slum, quote unquote, in very negative ways, but it is actually a space for economic as well as social activity. And that is not there in many of these sort of the PMAY type houses that I initially indicated. So what is the best way to deal with the crisis? I've highlighted 3 points very quickly. One is instead of building new houses, instead of going and building new houses, what you need to do is provide security, tenure security to the already existing informal housing, right? So what does this tenure security provide? It ensures that people have a right to housing and people are not evicted, the right to stay put. Protect that. That is one key idea. The other is, instead of building new houses, do in situ upgradation, right? So in situ upgradation, so in situ upgradation can either be through provision of services, just provide better services instead of doing, building new houses, or it can be through in situ redevelopment. That is, if the housing structure is so weak, you build on that same housing structure, but in situ, don't relocate. So first is tenure security, second is in situ upgradation, and thirdly, any form of these eviction or rehabilitation schemes should be done through public participation, through what even the Delhi High Court in that Ajay Makin case, that is the Shakur Basi case that I highlighted, spoke about meaningful engagement. These processes should happen through public participation, where the state and other stakeholders come together with the affected community, and then they together devise a scheme for their housing instead of a top-down PMAY scheme which just goes and builds houses, not taking into consideration what the demands of the people are. So that's basically, what I wanted to cover. There are obviously many more details that are there, and I can take it up over Q&A. But the simple idea that I want to end with is that the housing crisis in India should not be seen as a shortage that can be just provided by, building, typical paka houses, but it should always be seen as a form of of neglect that we had, and people are already claiming. People in slums are already claiming housing rights through formal and informal and legal and illegal means. What if at all the state responds to it? The state should respond by recognizing that and trying to improve the situation of people who are already living there, instead of relocation and rehabilitation or evictions, that is the case. Thanks. I would end there, and I would get back with other aspects during Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was a really interesting take on today's topic, and we'll have the questions at the end of the session.
Thanks.
Yeah. So now I'd like to introduce our next speaker for the day, KRUPA Rajangam. She's a Bangalore-based conservation architect with over 15 years of field experience in different aspects of heritage conservation. She's also the founder director of a collaborative heritage practice, linking people and heritage. She engages communities in a dialogue on heritage through personal initiatives like the Bangalore City Project, Naksha, Neighborhood Diaries, Hampi Craft Diaries, and MEP. Currently, she's an advanced doctoral scholar in heritage conservation studies at NIKITA. She started her formal research with the aim to understand the place of social or community value in the conservation process. Based on her ethnographic fieldwork at Hampi, a World Heritage Site, her work is developed into a heritage ethnography that examines the politics of heritage in a geographical and cultural context. She completed her master's in heritage conservation from University of York in UK in 2005 and her bachelor's degree in architecture from RV School of Architecture, Bangalore in 1999. We're excited to hear from you, ma'am.
Thanks for that.
I think we lost her. She might have to log in.
Yeah.
Text her.
Her screen is there, but she's not there.
No, it's yeah.
Ananya is also here. Hello, Ananya.
Hi, ma'am.
Yeah.
Had to be here to see all of you.
Yeah.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, we're able to hear you now, Nikita. You might have to share your screen again.
Yes, I'll do that.
Nikita, if it helps, perhaps someone suggested if you maybe switch off your video, things might get a little better.
Thank you for that suggestion. Yes. Just give me a second. Yeah, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, dear.
Yes, okay. Are you able to hear me better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. So I was at introducing Cubbon Park for those who don't know Cubbon Park. So Cubbon Park is about 196 acres and it's in a very strategic location in Bangalore with Mahatma Gandhi Road on one side and the old Pete on the other side. Of course, there are a lot of different kinds of visitors who visit Cubbon Park, right from joggers, walkers, sports enthusiasts, people who just want to loiter, people who want to rest, recreate, and vendors. But most importantly, Cubbon Park is one of the most visited tourist destinations in Bangalore. And this brings us to one of the initiatives that Karnataka State Tourism Department had, where they wanted to really leverage the location and the popularity of Cubbon Park to boost the tourism. So we started this, they kind of commissioned us, and this project was carried out with with a firm that I was working with called Sensing Local, where we were commissioned to do a wayfinding and information system for Cubbon Park. As you all know, Cubbon Park is basically surrounded by many administrative buildings like the Vidhan Sabha, public buildings, and there has also been a lot of encroachment in Cubbon Park in the past few years. So our whole mapping exercise started with really understanding what is the extent of the park. And with this, what we understood is that the Cubbon Park comes under the jurisdiction of the Karnataka State Department of Horticulture, who when we approached, were completely against any kind of construction or installation in the park. I mean, from their perspective, it was rightly so, because they looked at it as a park for like trees and ecology, and they didn't really want anything to be constructed. So the first challenge that we faced was when a government agency was kind of rejecting or objecting a certain development that we were already commissioned for by another agency. So the way we kind of tackled it is we let the horticulture department understand that this kind of wayfinding and information system was essentially to kind of showcase their own park, to showcase the monuments, public buildings, avenues, and everything they were investing to make the park beautiful. And a really nice outcome of this exercise of encouraging this kind of ownership of a government agency was a glimpse of a part of the signage, which was the bloom cycle. So considering that the horticulture department owned the park and was responsible for the upkeep, we leveraged it by taking their help to map out all the flowering trees of the park. So like you can see, you have at least one tree in the park that flowers at any point of time. Then what the second question that we came to is, what do people really want to know in a signage project? Because the park is a people's park, and when we're designing an infrastructure for the people, you really want to know how to cater to their needs. So we went on to do this with a 3-step, like a workshop, which was which involved the public. The first one was in collaboration with Shrishti School of Art and Design, where they have this program called Art in Transit for people who haven't heard, where they kind of occupy Cubbon Park metro station and kind of appropriate the space for different kinds of art and design activities. So in collaboration with them, we had the first workshop where we put up this map at the entrance, right at the entrance of the park, to kind of encourage people who were walking in Cubbon Park metro station, who probably come to Cubbon Park or otherwise, but they were aware of the park, to participate in the process of making the map, for us to understand what was missing, what they were looking for, where they were confused, points of the park that they had no clue about. And with this kind of information, what we understood is that there are multiple layers to the park that we had no clue about, like history, ecology, safety even. So this led us to the second workshop where we conducted these walks in the park with multiple experts from fields of history, ecology. This is Aliye Rizvi, who's part of our native place, where she's giving us a talk about the trees, the history of the trees in the park. And this helped us capture different perspectives and also cater to the different needs of people. So there were people who were coming to the park for the first time, but there were also people who've been coming to the park for years, and you wanted to give something for them to discover. The last workshop was where we actually put out a prototype of the signage to capture inputs in terms of legibility, readability, things that were missing. And the 2 sections that you see on the right were basically for a community board to kind of display events, or temporal events that happen across the year. And the small hole that you see in the right corner was an outcome of one of the walks with a visually impaired person in the park, to see how a person who cannot see anything in the park experienced the park. So we wanted to make a map which was in Braille that would help visually impaired people kind of navigate the park. This is of course an illustration, but you can see the different
Nikita lost you again.
Nikita, of signages that we
Nikita lost you again.
Can you repeat the last 1 minute?
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Okay, what did you all miss?
That last slide of yours.
Yeah.
That last slide of yours. Yeah.
Okay, so did you all hear the workshop 3?
Yes.
Okay.
Workshop, yes.
So
Workshop,
basically,
yes.
this is the outcome. Of course, an illustration, but it shows the whole system of signages which we developed with the help of people, with the help of agencies, and it was a real display of public participation in making of a public infrastructure for the city. I would definitely encourage people to go to Carbon Park and have a look at the signage. It's up and complete. The second project that I'm going to talk about is, I've named it Whose Lake Is It Anyway? This is again another project that we undertook at Sensing Local, where we looked at the lake, the rejuvenation of a lake in the KC Valley. So for people who don't know, Bangalore consists of 3 valleys, and the Belandur Lake, which is the largest, and Vattur Lake come in the KC Valley, and Vattur Lake is the last of the lakes in this valley. So this was initiated by a resident welfare organization in Whitefield, which basically witnessed a lot of incidents of fire, frothing, weeding of the park, and they approached a corporate MEL to fund the rejuvenation of the lake. Now, MEL is Mineral Enterprises Limited, so they agreed to fund the lake rejuvenation and had to work with the Bangalore Development Authority, that's BDA, who at that time, and I think even now, own the lake. So basically it comes under their purview. So since Whitefield Rising approached MEL, the basic ask from their side was to de-weed the lake. And for MEL, they were quite apprehensive to go ahead with this because they weren't sure if it was the most appropriate kind of action towards lake rejuvenation process. So they got in touch with us to help them kind of chart out a way to figure out where their finances should go. So what we started with is to understand what the real problem of the lake was. We started with interviews of the various stakeholders, government stakeholders, experts, the local community, to understand what the problem is and how can it be fixed. The outcome of it was that we understood that the pollutants of the lake was the cause of the weeding. So unless the pollution that came into the lake was not stopped, the weeds would continue to grow. So de-weeding was a futile exercise. So then what do we do? Where do we start? And considering that the development or the urbanization around Vattur Lake was rapidly increasing, like you can see in these satellite images, right from 2003 to 2017, the pollutants would continue to come. So the pollutants basically consisted of the sewage that was not treated and was basically directed into the lake. So that was the main source of the pollution in the lake. So you can just imagine raw sewage flowing to the lake, and Vattur Lake being the last of the lakes, it kind of was a accumulation of all the pollution from the KC Valley. Of course, lake frothing is something that has been in the news. And also another issue was the public health crisis that was in store, because there was pollution in the lake. There were people depending on the lake for their livelihoods. Farmers were harvesting fodder for their cattle. They were farming around the lake. So it was a real problem that had to be fixed. But who will clean the lake was the big question. So we started kind of mapping out and understanding who is really responsible for the lake and its kind of cleanliness. What we came up with is that there were 3 issues. One is who is responsible for the source water being clean. Second was the cleaning of the lake, which is what we were planning to work on. And then the third part was maintaining the lake. So like you can see, there are multiple agencies that are involved in this process, and through like conversations and interactions with them, what we understood was that each one was blaming the other. But what was good was that there was a roadmap by BWSSB, who was essentially responsible for clean water entering Bartu Lake, which means sewage treatment plants, adequate sewage treatment plants being constructed for the whole neighborhood of Whitefield itself. So since we understood that there was a plan, and it was, I think, into 3 to 4 years from when we started this project that it would be complete, that it made sense for us to prepare the lake when the water is clean. So what then we realized is that the funds that MEL was going to give us would be directed in the desilting process, which means that the silt that had accumulated for over 4 decades could be removed, and hence the lake would be better prepared to receive the clean water. We also proposed a wetland, which was at the mouth of the lake, which would receive and clean all the pollution that was coming in, even after the STPs were constructed. But what happened? So this project didn't go on because there was no agency that was owning up to what to do with the silt. So MEL as a company who was privately funding this did not want to go ahead with it because they did not know what to do with the silt. So here there is an opportunity where there is a private company coming forward to fund the upkeep of a kind of public asset, but due to poor institutional structures and no one really taking responsibility, it was lost. This brings me to the last project, which is the most recent one that I have worked on, and it was with a tech startup called Chalo in Mumbai, where I worked on a short stint in Bhopal. So this Bhopal, as you know, has a really good public transport system. It has, I think, one of the country's first BRTS system. That's the bus rapid transport system. And this project was funded by the World Bank. And the World Bank had to keep kind of measuring the performance of this public transport system. Okay, just to give you a brief, there were 3 main stakeholders in this project. One was BCLL, which is the regulatory body. Second was the operator who owned the bus. And third is a tech agency, that's Chalo, which was basically responsible for all the GPS tracking of the buses and the electronic ticketing. So when I talk about GPS and electronic ticketing, there was a lot of data that was kind of produced to be used, which could be used in decision making. And I'm just going to illustrate one small example of how we use data to help this kind of decision making process. So this is an illustration of how, what is the occupancy of the bus and what is the peak and non-peak kind of performance through the day. So like you can see, I mean, as anyone can kind of predict, the early hours of the day were low occupancy, and the late hours of the evening were low occupancy, but through the day, there was a high occupancy. So World Bank basically wanted to increase the ridership of the buses, and they told BCLL to do whatever they can in their capacity. Now, what happened was they extended the kind of bus service for 2 hours earlier in the morning and later in the evening. So the reason why I'm also bringing this project up is because when a public infrastructure like the bus is like a bus service is basically governed by private entities, in this case, Chalo, which was a fully private company, but had a kind of financial stake in the operation of a public service. money and finance, financial viability plays a very large role. And that's something that often we forget when it comes to politics. There's always power and there's a lot of finance involved. So what we did is we looked at data and we looked at how through the one full month, and looked at how occupied the bus was, and used this data to prove that we do not need to run the bus in certain hours of the day, or maybe we don't need to run the buses, so many buses in those hours of the day, because there is no demand. So when you're looking at a public service, we always need to look at who we're catering to and what do they really need. So we looked at this data to come up, balanced the demand, which was the perspective of the regulatory body, and the finance, which was from the perspective of a private company. So the biggest takeaway, and I want to end on a kind of optimistic note, is that the last project really demonstrates the role of data and the future of development, where we can look at data to help make decisions, help kind of democratize the process and make it transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for this very informative project.
Thank you, Nikita.
Thank you.
We'd like to call Salila.
Yeah, good work, yeah, Nikita.
Thank you.
Yeah, Salila ma'am, would you want to take over?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Namrata. Well, I'm extremely happy, and I think that we had a wonderful set of talks. And in this short 1 hour, we covered a range of topics. And I think what's fabulous is we started with Matthew talking about taking a very, all speakers had very different lenses. Though we're talking about politics of development, they spoke at very different scales and had very different lenses, which is what makes it, which is the theme of this particular series of talks, I guess. And that's what we were hoping to achieve. So thank you very much to all of our speakers. So Matthew talked about policy and law, and he was talking about the right to the city, which, as he defined, is the right to appropriate and participate in urban life. And very specifically, he talks about urban residents and not citizens, which is a very important distinction, which he can obviously elaborate on later on. And then KRUPA talked about the politics of conservation. And I think I couldn't frame it better, the question that she asked. She says, how much conservation is enough? Because as she raised in her presentation, there are different people with different claims to the same land. And well, while it all seems very, I mean, legit, you know, you have the government saying we want to protect our heritage, and it is obviously a seemingly valid intent of the government, but at what cost is the question, right? What are the trade-offs? And then NIKITA with her 3 projects. So it's fabulous the way it got scaled to very on-the-ground kind of projects. And she talked about 3 very different projects in the public realm. As you can, there was a park, and there was the lake, and then there's the public transit. And then she talked about the various issues that the kind of politics that evolve around actually making things happen and making those projects more, or those spaces more inclusive to the general public. And so there's again the idea of the inclusivity, right? So Matthew talked about inclusivity at a city scale. KRUPA talked about inclusivity at more precinct kind of level, and perhaps the city scale as well. And NIKITA spoke about inclusivity at a very project or a location specific scale. And all 3 obviously, I think the common thread that comes out is how we need these, at any scale, we need these projects or these policies to be more people-centric, is what actually, to my mind, comes out. And I think I'm not going to take more time. I would like the students to ask all the questions. But just to get things warmed up, my question to the 3 speakers was, you worked on the field as well as you've seen the policies, you've studied, you researched the policies as well. And so where do you see the meeting ground for the disenfranchised or the excluded with the people making these decisions for them? It's a very broad question, I guess, but so because the idea here is there are the disenfranchised and excluded, and but they are also rightful claimants to the spaces that they are evicted from, right? Or they're deprived of. So since all three of you have worked on projects as well, and you had close association, conversations with these people and policymakers, where do you think there's a meeting ground? Because never seems to go beyond what should be, right? Where can it actually happen? So can we start with Matthew?
Yeah, so I'll take a quick stab at it. In terms of in terms of the questions that I specifically addressed around housing rights, I would say that there have been forums, there have been examples where people working on the ground have interacted with the state and authorities of the state and have been able to shape certain policies in a positive way, at least at one level. In terms of how it has always been carried out, it's still a question of whether the intention was fully realized. It's still an open question, but I would just give maybe a few examples. I was not directly involved in some of them, but some of the people I've worked with have been involved. Even say in the Karnataka context, let me say this is the Karnataka affordable housing policy of 2016. The way it was framed, and there was at least some level of involvement of some of the slum right activists, some of the housing rights experts in the formulation of that policy, which is not the best policy, but it is definitely a step better than some of the other sort of state-based systems that are there. The other one again is in Odisha, the Odisha Slum Right to Slum Dwellers Act, which is giving pattas, or which is giving land rights to slum dwellers. A lot of people, who have been working on these questions were consulted, had a role to play in framing that. So that is at a policy level, but more on the ground level, I would say it need not always be through an engagement which is very formal. I'm saying that often claims, as I've even sort of alluded to in the presentation, often claims are made on urban spaces through negotiations with the local political bosses and the local bureaucratic sort of system, which may not always give a permanent sort of right or a claim. It gives a sort of what is known as a precarious sort of right, which you still need to fight with. But I believe even at one level that is possible, and that is happening across. So that is at a very micro level that happens in terms of housing rights, where you actually work with the local councillor, the elected councillor, work with the system, and it has happened. Some of them have protected, but it's still precarious, because if the equation doesn't work well, it can go wrong. The other is at a high level, and then also at a mid level. So in terms of, one is a proactive thing, as a housing policy is a proactive sort of measure. Then there are reactive measures. When an eviction is carried out, people come together and work with the system. So the best example I would give again is the Shakur Basti example in Delhi, where actually, people went to the court, got an order against the eviction, then worked with the system. The state and the community worked with the system to come up with what is known as a draft protocol for slum rehabilitation. This is 2019 draft protocol. It's a great victory. But again, that victory has been undone by this recent Supreme Court verdict, which I mentioned. But so it's always precarious. But I believe there are spaces. And many of the people who have been working on this, by the way, are architects, architects and urban planners. And Gaudamban and others, people have been working on this. So, I mean, and there are obviously, disagreements on some of these questions on title itself. I know some people who are very much opposed to giving, land titles permanently, because even giving those titles, there are chances of exclusion. So one is at, there are levels where this is possible, but there's a cautionary note which I would like to place. Even if any of us who have the privilege to engage with the state, and I've been part of some state, not on the housing question, but on the governance, urban governance structure question, I've had the privilege to work closely with the government. My only cautionary note is that even when any of us engage with the state, we should always know where we are coming from. I think KRUPA sort of alluded to that, where we are coming from. Even when we are making sort of any sort of suggestions, we should be mindful of the biases that we might carry, and ensure that the people who are most affected are represented more than quote unquote experts or practitioners. So that's the only cautionary note I'll place. But I believe there are some spaces that are open, but the effort should not be for us to go and occupy those spaces, but the effort must always be to include the most affected people in these spaces. So yeah, I would stop there.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you. That was good. Thank you. That was very good.
Yeah. KRUPA?
Thanks, Alida.
Yeah.
That was a very
giving voice to the voiceless. Voice to the voiceless is a wonderful idea. Voice to the voiceless is a wonderful idea.
No, ma'am, I've actually gone beyond the voice to the voiceless, because I've realized they have their own voice and it doesn't match with mine, right?
But we don't hear them. No, we don't listen to them. Unfortunately, we don't listen to them.
So my response to Saila's question was going to be that there can't be one common sort of meeting ground. We have to tackle this at different levels. So one is, of course, the level of pedagogy, which is why I was doing a little bit of mind games with the students. There is a certain level of, how we are trained to be experts. So I think we need to rethink that a little bit. And then connected to the level of policy, what I have found in my work, research work and field experience of 15 plus years, the contestations are because everybody cares. Okay, the contestations are not because everybody is apathetic. The policymaker cares, the guy on the ground cares, but the conflict is over the kind of care, the nature of care, or what they think is care, what they think is appropriate care, which is why they are exacerbated, especially in conservation practice from what I've seen, because it's not like somebody is coming there and knocking off your houses because he doesn't care about you and he cares about the dam or the road or the infrastructure project. It is because he cares for the historic environment. And the person whose house is being demolished is equally flabbergasted because he's also caring for that environment, because he's rooted in that landscape. No, it's his grandfather's lands, it's his house, right? So this is where I think at the policy level, we need to sort of think of ways we can move beyond care, right? Nobody explicitly writes policies keeping care in mind, but what I have found is that is the underlying factor, and which is where the problems come up a lot of the times, because for practitioners, for policymakers, it's but I was planning to do good things. My intent was good, right? And literally at the level of every day, right? There was this, so there is this anthropologist who's been recently doing ethnography of conservation practice. So what he does is he follows conservation practitioners as they go about their day-to-day work, and he tries to see what goes into their decision-making, right? So then he writes about it, he's still writing about it, it's very recent work. So he uses the word which I think is very appropriate. He talks about conservation decision-making being about, which applies to development in other sectors, I feel. It's about temporary reconciliation, right? So it's pretty much like the COVID crisis we're going through now. So you've tied a knot today, tomorrow that same knot may not be there like that. So it's not long-term resolution. So when we approach our practice, when we approach our fields, we think about 5-year plans, we think about 10-year plans. But straight away, even in the implementation, even in the intent, it's already become something else, right? Because there are so many divergent views on care. So I say X, somebody reads it as Y, but they're all coming from a good place. Nobody's coming from a bad place. So I thought this was a useful framework for the students, especially because I'm sorry, I'm a bit out of touch with architecture pedagogy in the last few years, but our training was almost like, you know, we're going out there and solving all the problems of mankind. I'm so sorry, we can't do that. Please take that burden off your shoulders.
Thank you for saying it.
Oh, so that means the training is still that, is it?
Yeah,
So we're still
it
training
ended up
that
becoming
way.
a burden. It's becoming a burden in design studios.
Yeah, because when I read this particular perspective, you know, it shared a lot of my own burden. And there is actually a pretty amazing scholar who does conservation, but not building conservation. He does object conservation, painting, restoration, and stuff. And he said this, you know, we need to openly accept that conservation is intervention. We are intervening. We cannot maintain things as it is. And only then we can pave way for a more ethical practice and for a more ethical training of practitioners. Because the burden that we bear is huge. So I'm going to stop
I
at
think
that. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Because yeah, the idea of pedagogy is becoming very important. I think people are starting to question, and with this COVID thing and the online thing, that's a different thing altogether. But just thinking about how teaching happens and also what teaching happens, right, is what you're saying. And yeah, it's very important. Thanks, KRUPA. Nikita? In the meantime, I invite the students to please, and other viewers, obviously, participants, to please type in their questions, and we'll invite them to ask the speakers directly. Okay. Yeah. Nikita? Yeah.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I do feel like there is a middle ground, and as much as our planning process, and I'm obviously going to come from an urban planning kind of point of view, where the planning process so far has always been a very kind of top-down, you know, we've always like employed a very top-down approach, and to kind of include and to incorporate these very nuanced kind of issues and challenges on ground, I really feel and I endorse decentralization and basically local area development plans instead of the master plan that we've been conventionally going ahead with. I mean, we also know that the master plan process, though included a lot of public consultations to make it as inclusive, as participatory as possible, it didn't kind of go through. But then there are also, you know, examples of, in India and abroad, and from Matthew's talk, I recollected this one example of a Brazilian architect and urban planner called Alejandro Aravena, who conducted this whole social housing project in Brazil in a very, very systematic and participatory, you know, with a very systematic and participatory approach. And very kind of nuanced issues came to the surface, where the questions like, do you want a water heater in your house, or do you want like a bathtub? Like issues like that really brought to light the ownership of these people to kind of have the social housing and own the social housing, and therefore use the houses that were made for them. So in that way, I feel participation, local area development would definitely take us forward in making the process inclusive.
And I think, thanks, Nikita. And I think one thing that's very important there is how you view the people, the word recipients is a wrong word, actually. The people who want, the residents of that space, right, or that area. KRUPA is laughing. So see, that's how we stumble with words. So yeah, how you view the original residents or the people who also have a claim to that space becomes very important, right? And that's where language also becomes super important, I guess, because just today in our sociology class, we were talking about culture and language, the role of language and culture. So I think this is very pertinent. And yeah, so in the social project, housing project that Nikita is referring to, I guess the conversation is more about people in a room sitting and talking about things together, right? Rather than saying, kind of like Matthew's case where he's talking about creating housing and then just saying, hey, go and live in that. So there's a huge difference in how that design happens versus this design. And that makes a world of difference for sure. So I think those, but what goes into the social housing kind of project that Nikita talked about, the components are probably very important to understand versus, I mean, it's probably, I don't know what is it time that's required or resources, what makes it different, I don't know. Anyway, so we have a lot of questions, so I'm not going to take any more time. Anvesha, would you like to ask your question directly, please? You can unmute and yourself and switch on your video as well, if possible.
Yes, good evening. So my question was, the slums are generally seen as a negative element in the urban fabric, like which has led to these incidents of eviction and alienation. So how effective can public awareness be in changing the scenario?
I believe that's for me. Is it?
Yeah, please just let us know who the question is directed to. So that's for Matthew, right? Yeah, Matthew, just run with it then. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I see the biases that that you're talking about is the reality, but I would say that it's particularly true for people like us. I would say the socioeconomic class that we belong to, and we are all guilty of some of those framings. Even the terminology, terminologies that we use, even the term of slums is often sort of takes away the kind of habitation that the people themselves identify with, because they would have usually whatever. I mean, Kannada is slightly different, but at least in the North Indian context, I'm quite familiar how there are other ways, say Basti, or there are ways of identifying a place which is more close to recognizing it as a natural place of habitation and not as something which is illegal encroachment. So I'm saying many of the biases that are coming in are also because of the nature and of the language that is used, and that language is coming from structures of power, right? So framings that the state and to some extent actually academia, right? All of us are, so academia is used for inhabitation is, sort of feeds into it. The way to unlearn it is obviously not that easy. I mean, I don't know, awareness campaigns. Obviously, one is about what you teach in all kinds of programs which have a which have a larger social, especially say field like architecture or urban planning or law. These are what I would say very positivist, disciplines in some ways, right? I mean, there's some sort of what is called as an interpretive turn happening in some of these spaces, but I hope that is taken forward, whereby this sort of strict categorization of legal, illegal, formal, informal, that is avoided, and the realities of how most people live, which is not in whatever 40 by 60 sites with everything sort of provided in the formal way. You just have to accept that what we think is normal is not necessarily the actual reality of people. And once you accept that maybe you are the exception, not the norm, and that sort of framing actually is reflected in our in pedagogy, in understanding urban, the nature of urban, or not just urban, I mean just nature of of development per se, then I hope that, I think, and especially for, professional, quote unquote, professional fields like, architecture, urban planning, and law, all of them, I believe, are equally guilty in that framing. So I think there's a lot of chance for improvement within the, within these schools. And I hope RV and other places can sort of take lead in correcting that sort of, biases.
Thanks, Matthew. Would Nikita and KRUPA want to add to that?
KRUPA, can I go? Yeah, okay. So I do agree with Matthew, and since there are a lot of RV teachers here, I'm guessing I do want to bring it up that we have actually never done social housing as a project in school, and even as an institution, maybe we should relook at how to sensitize students and how to make them aware that architecture is not only about building, like villas and like big commercial complexes, but it is also about a house for everyone. And maybe it's a good opportunity to kind of include that as well in the curriculum, to just broaden people's kind of horizon and look at the spectrum of architecture that's there, to experience, to design. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I want to add something to what Nikita was saying. So Nikita, the previous semester, in fact, we were in studio with Edgar sir, and the housing studio was titled as hybrid housing, So we looked at exactly what you were talking about, sensitizing. So we started out with mapping their journey of their own space, their own house, and then moving to actually communities around, slums around, and, sensitizing them with that process, and so on and so forth, So I think we're trying to bring in that idea of social, housing in today's context, especially, trying to blur in the social boundaries, that entire idea of, like how you were saying, where everything is just, very, I think, glittery in that sense. You just have like villas, and so we're trying to put through that idea to students as well.
Nikita, Bakul had actually taken a couple of students to the Naidhalli slum to make a housing project over there. Okay. I landed up doing the fast track for one of those students. That's how I came to know that there was a project like that. Okay. Somewhere down the line, the way you're talking about it, I had got upset with one bunch talking about urbanism as an elitist middle class environment. And Smriti Jakkur, if you remember, she had met her in one of the conferences and she gave me a contact of a slum. It's called MS Palya off Nandidurg Road. Students have sat down and documented it. And I was very happy about the students' comments saying that they earn 1,500 a month and I have spent 1,500 in one cup of coffee and biscuits. So I thought my job that day was done because they understood sociology without me teaching them any further. Yeah. So it's a struggle. It's a struggle because architecture is looked at as a very elitist profession. So it's a struggle.
Absolutely.
It's a struggle. Last semester, I think the second semester students actually did COVID. They tried to understand the distress, the people walking back home, and they documented it. Second semester, I must actually be very fair. They've done a fantastic job. They've done a fantastic job. Some of them are here. Some of them are here. Some of the second semester students are here.
KRUPA, would you like to add to that, or should we?
I think we should move on because
yeah, we'll move on. We have a few more questions, quite a few questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anagha, are you there? Or would you like to ask your question? Yeah, I can.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening. My question is not exactly, may not be what we're talking about. It's from a perspective of what on probably someone like a non-activist or a non-architect, someone who's not closely related to these issues, who might not really know this as an issue? How would they be made aware of it, or how could they act upon it if they were aware of it?
So is this for all three speakers?
Yes, ma'am, I'd like to keep it.
Who wants to take a gander?
I'll go.
Yeah.
So Anaga, by just asking that question, you've already brought in that awareness, right? So if that awareness was not there, the question would not have been posed. And the fact that you've thought through and you're using words like non-architect, non-activist, which means you're already giving some thought to what those words might mean, what is the kind of history that they carry with them, right? So just keep doing what you're doing right now. I think you're doing good.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes, you're asking the right questions, Anaga. You're asking the right questions.
Absolutely. Like Anuradha ma'am said, the job of a teacher is done when the students ask the right questions. Teachers are not here to give you the answers.
Yes. I will second it. I will second it.
That's going to make the rest of my semester easy for sure. Thanks, KRUPA.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Matthew, Nikita. Matthew, would you like to add to that?
Nothing much. I think we'll just take, more questions.
Okay. Nikita, should we move on then? So the next question, there's no name here, but could that person
That's
read it out?
That's Alankrita. Alankrita, can you ask a question, please?
Yes, sure. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. So my question was an extension to what KRUPA ma'am already asked. So conservation is actually a very big necessity in the terms of the history and culture of the site. But then the people residing near those heritage sites or the conservation site also have a right to that place. So where could we really draw a line or bring both of them together to find a solution? What can we do in that context?
Yeah. I'll answer that. So see, again, where, like I said, when I was doing my undergraduate program, like, oh my God, very long time ago, these were not the kind of questions that were being raised, right? So the fact that these are the kind of questions that are being raised and they're being discussed in the studios already talks about the change, like what Matthew spoke about, the interpretive turn, right? So it's about rerouting ourselves in the humanities, because I firmly believe architectural discipline is a humanitarian discipline. Okay, and I'm using it in all the meanings of that word, humanitarian discipline. We tend to get carried away, of course, because there is also the sense that we see ourselves as bridging between artists and problem solvers, right? So we are the artists who solve problems and who don't just dream, right? So there is that double burden. But I would say this is not a double burden. This is an opportunity. We have the amazing opportunity to tread different domains. So that's how we're able to see these kind of different perspectives, right? So getting back to the specifics of your question, I would say, please look at specific context. If it is work for site A, do not assume it will work for site B. Site B needs to be looked at independent of what has happened in site A. Site A can give you guidelines, yes, but do not make them prescriptions. So everybody's headache is different. We know now COVID attacks everybody differently, and you can't always take a paracetamol for it, right? So you need to get into what these root problems are at each context.
Thank you, ma'am.
There's a question from
Namrata.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I wanted to ask, how do we deal with the destruction of a pre-existing building to restore something which was originally there? I mean, it was a continuation of Alankrita's question itself. So you were talking about how much conservation is too much conservation. I just wanted you to expand a little bit about that. Like, how do we deal with destruction?
Right. So I'm going to actually redirect it to the other two speakers to connect with what they've said. So if I put that same question as, did the slums come before the city or did the city come before the slums? And I agree with Matthew that slums is a very wrong word. That's like a chicken and egg, right? If those people were not there, there would be no city. If the city was not there, there would be no those people. So this is the kind of conundrum when you say, how do you go back in time? So if you talk about the Cubbon Park project or the wetland project, where the wetlands for people of Bangalore, where the wetlands for the migratory birds that were there before, for the egrets which were there before us, or are you going back in time to like early man to when it was a prehistoric site, right? So these are all difficult kind of conundrums which sort of, the red herrings, let's say, okay? So authenticity defined by me as a conservation architect does not mean it's more authentic than authenticity defined by somebody else, right? So our role there at that point of time, when you're talking about destruction of something that was already there, you sort of weigh it against who are the people who are losing out because of that destruction. These may not necessarily be powerful people, but you need to focus on that, right? These may not be the people who have the authority to be there, right? But that is what we are doing when I say we are rooting ourselves as a humanitarian discipline. I'm very sorry, I'm getting very prescriptive here and I'm going fully into lecture mode. Apologies for that. But I think this is a question that Matthew and Nikita should address as well from their own lenses. I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I'll just take it from that. Thanks. I think that framing was very good, and I agree. I completely agree with what KRUPA is saying. And so just looking at some of the what I was addressing was pretty much there in terms of in terms of the slum destructions and destruction of houses happening even for conservation. And the other big thing I would say is actually based on the kind of looking at the instances of eviction and the reasons for evictions is often for environmental reasons. Okay, if you look at it, now the question is to which one of those are legitimate. You can't. It's a side-by-side sort of question, as KRUPA already mentioned. But what I'm saying is, if you look at the kind of evictions that have happened, the maximum number of evictions that have happened, in the Delhi context and even otherwise, many of them have come in terms of as a byproduct of environmental activism. Some of the most terrible judgments of the court have come in cases where good quote unquote good people like us, right, went to court and said that there is garbage, garbage sort of being thrown on the street. Almitra Patel versus Union of India. Almitra Patel is an activist. Some of you might know her, based in Bangalore, also works on garbage issues. That's one of the cases where, instead of it was a garbage issue, but it later turned into slum demolition, right? So I'm saying that even when we, say that these, conservation is important or environment is important, we should always look at the other side of it. And obviously the easy thing to say is that you have to balance it, which I would also agree. But I'm just saying that if you go ahead without acknowledging the existence of different claims, then that's the biggest problem. And I would say even NGOs, well-meaning environmental NGOs, have faltered, and maybe even conservation groups possibly, right, have faltered in being very, sort of holier than thou, and being so true to their sort of belief that they can't see other realities that exist. And I believe that, it really needs, us to take a step back and see things differently. And I'm speaking this, about this in, sort of looking again in that sort of interpretive term. Law by itself is even more sort of, turned in that way than architecture. It's even less connected with social science than I believe it should be. So similarly, if we train ourselves to see things from these other perspectives, and we don't get so convinced about our rightness, then we would be able to see, things for what they are.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, an interdisciplinary perspective and understanding also of other disciplines is really the need of the hour. And I think, again, it's a question of finding forums to make that happen, within our own curricular frameworks and beyond. Nikita, would you like to add to that? Nikita's good. Okay, I think Shweta had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Matthew if he could elaborate for the benefit of architecture students, the various forums available for public participation. Yeah, just some references, because I think there are a lot of budding architects here, second semester and fourth semester. So just for their benefit and knowledge,
Sorry, public participation on what? Sorry.
Public participation in India for like architects, and like forums available which you can make a mention of, so they can just.
So in terms of, I guess, the built environment more specifically, I guess, or
yeah. So I'm not I'm not sure about all the forums, especially for where architects can intervene, but there are many initiatives which are by activists and groups. So so there are urban rights networks that are there. So globally there's something called the Right to the City network, which is there. I'm not saying it's it may not have enough people from everywhere, but it's a existing network which works on some of the things that I'm speaking about. It's a global network. There are within each country there are national networks. In India, there's what I'm part of a network called the National Urban. Okay, I forgot the full thing. It's called NCU, but it's basically National Forum for Urbanization and Sustainable, something. So, but it's an existing. I don't know if you can Google search and find it out, and or how to get in touch. There are people who you would know, and that's how you usually get in touch. There are other sort of forums where obviously you have your architectural associations and stuff. I don't want to speak about that, but in terms of other engaging, there are forums that NGOs have set up. So in Bangalore, I would just mention a couple of them. There's something called Bengaluru ConverRVsation, which is Bangalore People's Forum. I've been part of it since 2009. There are, it's a mix of different kinds of people working on issues of Bangalore, environment, sustainability, built environment, architecture, urban governance, urban commons. So it's a forum which has tried to sort of raise issues out with a people's manifesto for certain demands. So it's and there's a Google group and that's there. And I don't want to peg anything here, but I run a urban group called Critical City Circle, which has not been very active recently, but that's more a discussion forum. If anyone is interested in in a slightly more discussion, it's not action oriented much, more discussion oriented. So if anyone wants to get involved in that forum, can just write to me and join that group. And it's a very mixed group of architects, planners, practitioners, scholars, activists. We have more than 100 people now. So that's mostly Bangalore based forum. So there are multiple forums that are there, and I'm sure there are other ones which are more specific to architecture and built environment, which I'm not aware of.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks, Matthew. There's one more question from Aromita. We are kind of drawing to a close. So anyone else with questions, now's your chance. So Aromita, would you like to ask your questions, please? And let us know who you're addressing them to.
Yes, ma'am. So my question is regarding the appreciation of the interdependency between the urban poor and the so-called urban elite. And I feel like if this interdependency was sort of appreciated, then that would get us to sensitize these issues like slum clearance and demolitions and all of that. So if Matthew sir could elaborate on that, I think it would be really.
Matthew sir seems quite strange, but anyway, so
actually, I think this question would be valid for all three. So
yeah, Yeah,
go for it, man.
I'll just put in a line. I don't want to speak too much. So I agree. I think the answer is sort of part of the question here. So there is an interdependency, and that interdependency is often not acknowledged. what frameworks like Right to the City and others seek to do is that they acknowledge that the primary builders of the city are actually people, often living in these informal conditions. And if you acknowledge that, and thankfully that case, that great judgment, I would say, which is the Rajangam case, said that these are the people who have contributed most to the city. Now you have to sort of acknowledge that existence of that reality. And the more we accept it, and not in a very, I would say, what I would call as some sort of benevolence, out of our great benevolence. So look at all these, people who are there, they service us, we do all the productive, intellectual work. Not in that sort of frame, just as a reality that we accept, not coming out of some sort of benevolence that makes us feel good about our great, sort of our wide-heartedness or anything. It's just a reality that we accept, right? So it's just an acceptance of reality, and if you accept that reality, I think we can move forward, and also not, we don't have to feel too good about even accepting that.
Nikita, KRUPA.
Well, how do we get to appreciate? Well, I think it definitely lies in, since we are talking in an academic kind of forum, I would definitely say a large part of it is education, and the way we've kind of, again, getting back to how we involve different kind of sections, or like design for different sections to make people more sensitive, I would say. Yeah.
KRUPA, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, sorry. Again, I don't want to take up too much time on this, but I think Aromita has answered her question already. I was just reading it, and she speaks about blurring of the boundaries, right? So that's kind of where it starts already. You acknowledge that these are boundaries that we raise, and then we knock them down for ourselves. We blur the boundaries. There's some really good work. In fact, just look up blurred boundaries. It's scholarship connected with, again, it doesn't directly work with urban planning, but it's urban studies, let's say, framework. Akhil Gupta, and it's been taken on by a few others since. And these are short essays which have just taken on this blurred boundaries. It's come into the conservation heritage discourse as well. So that might be an interesting thing for the students to look at from a spatial perspective.
Blurred Boundaries by Akhil Gupta.
He started it off in a different context, but it has since moved on into other domains.
Yeah, state society, it's mostly state society blurred boundaries, So,
correct, but it's been taken up in heritage discourse, it's been taken up in planning. So those are the kind of relevant literature, I think, for.
Yeah. No, it's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful book. I've gone through some of it. So
yeah, definitely. Then that's going to be a must read for some of our students. And I think that key to the word interdependency is also cannot be emphasized enough, in the sense of just acknowledging that they need each, everyone, it's half the problem. Yesterday I was watching this talk in IIH, someone, Prasad Khanolkar, he was talking about toilet politics in the slums of Dharavi, and the whole thing about, slums, the slums being expendable, people living, residents of the informal city being expendable. So how do you look at those people and the people that are not living in, as Matthew says, what we assume are the norm rather than the exception? We are the exception, right? So interdependency, I think, is a very key term in what you've brought up. One of our colleagues, Sijo, has a question, and this is for all the panelists, I guess. I'm going to read it out on his behalf. He says, this is for the benefit of the lower semester students of architecture. Can the panelists address how does politics influence architecture and vice versa in projects which don't really have obvious references to policies? Did you get that? How does politics influence architecture and vice versa in projects which don't really have obvious references to policies?
Okay.
Everything is politics, actually.
Yeah, I was wondering why he sort of qualified it as in projects which don't have obvious references to policies.
Teacher, would you like to clarify that?
And the other question of how to...
I don't know if he's there. So, I guess, Sijo, are you there?
He's there. He's there. He's there, but it's mute.
Yeah, that is evident. So I think he's talking about a lot of times, I don't know if this is what he's, because in lower semesters, I'm assuming the question then is, we do not really talk about policies and programs and things. We're just talking about the projects per se, right? Without reference to these other things. I don't know,
this is coming from our 2 sessions that we've been having, the past second semester studio, which we are continuing with the third semester studio. We are asking students to take a political stand, a viewpoint, a personal viewpoint, and a overarching general viewpoint in terms of society, the way the society is organized, and therefore design for it. So it started because of the COVID. We started with the idea of politics in the second semester, how politics influences how we behave. Then because of the COVID, it became the distressed and the migrants, the fact that the elite also migrate and the non-elite also migrate. Both of us migrate for a job, and the way we migrate and the modalities and the advantages some have and the disadvantages some have. So that is where probably the question is coming from. How do students understand that question better? Probably it's built around the idea of understanding it without having the theoretical background.
Okay, thank you, ma'am, for clarifying that. The only way I can address it...
KRUPA, we can't hear you. Could you be a little louder?
Oh, okay, hang on. Does this help?
I think you'll have to hold that microphone a little closer to your...
Is this better?
Yeah.
Is not very much better.
No?
Did we lose her? Oh no, she's there.
Oh, now?
It is still...
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this fine?
Yeah, you're audible.
Better than before. Yes.
Okay. So I'm again addressing this to the students. How does politics affect architecture? Politics affects architecture much as it affects everything that we do, right? Right from the decision of getting up in the morning to the kind of outfit I choose to wear, to the contestations with your parents about, can I take the car? Can I not take the car? Everything is political. Personal is political, right? And especially with a visual domain like architecture, we're talking about visual, the aesthetics, okay? So that is as subjective as it can get, right? So it's my aesthetic sense over somebody else's aesthetic sense, right? So if we connect this to Matthew's work and a little bit of what NIKITA has shown us as well in terms of how we see public spaces or how we look at the slums, there has again been like some, if you're not even familiar with, let's say, the policies or the theories of architecture, if you look at the word that is often used in newspapers when we talk about beautification, right? That is a word that everybody is familiar with. And that already gives you a starting point to think about how politics might affect architecture, or even when you are not rooted in particular theories or philosophies, you already have your past experiences, you already have your past conditioning, which gives you a sense of, how you see these efforts at beautification. It could just be a matter of the kind of trees you plant in the campus to how you decide what kind of drawings you will make, how you will present those drawings. and the discussions you have with your faculty which get heated about, no, you're misinterpreting my design.
Nikita,
I'm just going to stop there.
Nikita, you
I
have
think,
anything to say there?
Yeah.
Because you came up with the fishermen using the Vatur Lake for fishing.
Yes.
And, that lake that is there in Sarjapur has become a walking lake where the fishermen have been told not to come and fish. And the cow is not coming there to be cleaned. Buffalo is not coming there to be cleaned.
Yes. I actually agree with what KRUPA said as well, that I feel like politics doesn't, I mean, of course, exist only at a scale of the urban or the city, but at every scale, right from the kind of materials that we're using, where is, I mean, even when you look at demolition, where is our demolition waste going? Every single aspect is directly or indirectly kind of related to the policies made at some level or the other. It's what we choose to kind of address, what we in that context, what is more relevant that we choose to kind of respond to is what, I mean, then you say if it's political or not political. So I do agree with KRUPA. At every level, we want it or don't want it, we are kind of have to work within the constraint of some policy or the other. So, yeah.
Yeah, just very, very quickly. I mean, I don't want to add too much on this and speak. I mean, we're already a bit late. So firstly, I completely agree. And secondly, I think what all of us need to acknowledge is that when what we think is apolitical is perhaps more political than some overt political actions, right? We think we are architects, professionals, whatever, lawyers in my case, trying to do something which is, completely apolitical, just professional. But the politics that is involved in that is something that we don't even see. And that is actually a privilege that we have to not see the politics that we participate in. Whereas the people who are more sort of thing, their actions might appear to be more political, but that is because they don't have the privilege of sort of engaging in the way we do, which we call professional and not political. So I think that we just need to accept it at first hand. And quickly on the question of, where policies don't have a play, if you're building if you're designing a house, if you're building a house, obviously there would be some norms you have to follow. That is, some policies. So you would have from starting with setback norms to those kind of questions. So there's hardly any sort of practice which which doesn't involve even policies. And the other thing I quickly wanted to mention was that I mentioned about how informal housing exists with in violation of certain norms and still try to claim some legality, right? But I just also want to acknowledge that the so-called formal housing and the so-called proper housing that all of us live in, even those actually are mostly riddled with illegalities, and we don't see it. I mean, if you look at most of the housing, about 90% of the housing in Bangalore actually violates certain norms, right? But we don't see us living here, illegally. We see all of us are great people, and we're always good citizens. But we have to accept that all of us are also party to some of these illegalities, and it's not just these people out there who are encroachers. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I think that's, and just to tap this just brings back to my mind an article I read several years back. And the title was, I mean, this was by a person called Stuart Eldon, and he was talking about the right to the city. He was kind of describing, he was discussing Lefebvre's idea of the right to the city. And the title of the paper was, there is politics of space because space is political. I mean, so just whether we accept it or not, as you were saying, space is political, and we just have, there is going to be politics, no matter at what level we deal with it. So that brings us to the close of this amazing session. Thanks so much. And this is our first session of this series, little webinar series we're doing this semester. And I can't thank our speakers and audience enough for making it extremely invigorating and I think it's been very thought-provoking also for many of our students. Thanks again. And now I'd like to invite our principal, Dr. O.P. Bhavane, to come and say a few words.
Good evening, all. At the outset, I would like to thank Mr. Matthew, Architect KRUPA, and Architect NIKITA. A wonderful webinar and very thought-provoking topic, I would say. Wherever there is a word politics, I think it evokes a lot of interest and a lot of enthusiasm. I don't think that we as the organizer could do justice with the time, in the sense that just giving 15-minute slots to each speaker. Probably the topic was like each speaker could have spoken for a couple of hours on it, and the people would have really loved it. But nonetheless, this was a wonderful effort. Coming to I would say NIKITA and some other speakers, they also spoke about the academics and the pedagogy. I think we have to deliberately bring in some component of discussing politics of development in our design studios and other studios also. I think we already have a full-fledged one semester program in masters. I think Dr. Salila knows about it. She also involves in that. I think the similar, we should not shy away that how the politics plays an important role in developing the society, and say developing and implementation of the architectural projects. Most importantly, in all this process, we have to also see that where is the voice of the people in the entire process. We look, if you look at, there are several projects to name. If you look at the certain projects which were undertaken at the time of Mayawati in Lucknow, okay, you look at what is going on with regard to the Amravati capital projects, where it was and where it is now. Look at the politics of the development of Varanasi Ghats or the Sabarmati Ghats. Look at the politics that is happening in case of the people who have been displaced due to Narmada Valley project. And the day-to-day politics, if you look at the politics of the land conversion, the politics of FAR, politics of FSI, the politics of the land use. So I think without politics, nothing moves actually. I think they play a very important role. See, I wish we also had, say, deep indulgence in the political issues. I remember one of our professors in Manipal, he was also a councillor of this in the city. So he used to bring a lot of interesting stories that how the development schemes are being discussed and being implemented. So there's a lot of interesting things, and of course, as Mr. Matthew was telling, that it is the people who build the city, but at what number the voice of the people comes in the picture, because I think that are they really heard? Okay, so I think we have to make our budding architects, the future architects of this country, aware that how the political plays the role in the development of the society, development of, even if you look at how the smart city projects are proceeding, nothing is free from the politics, I think, and I think we should not shy away discussing these matters, and maybe that we should find more and more opportunity to get the policymakers into our studios, the administrators into our studios, and sometime I appreciate Professor Prasanna Rao. Sometime he even get the politically elected representative from the neighborhood, and he makes them to speak to and interact with the students. So they also understand the mindset of the politician, that what they think of the development when it comes to their own wards, their own city. So wonderful discussion, wonderful talk. I wholeheartedly thanks once again to all the distinguished speakers, and congratulations and kudos to my own team, Dr. Salila, Professor Anuradha, and our Shweta for taking all the efforts and taking all efforts to organize this wonderful webinar. So thank you students once again. I think we look forward more sessions of this kind.
Yes, sir. Thank you so
sir.
much. Thanks.
Namrata,
thank you, sir. Thank you, thank you.
Namrata, Niharika?
Yes, now that we've come to the end of the session, I would like to thank the speakers again. It was our pleasure to hear your thoughts on today's topic. I'd also like to thank our principal, O.P. Bhavani, Dean Professor Suresh K. Murthy, faculty coordinators Anuradha ma'am, Salila ma'am, and Shweta ma'am, student coordinators Namrata, Alankrita, Anvesha, Gautam, Sujan, and Shashwat, and finally the audience for being here today and making this event successful. Do stay tuned for more updates on upcoming events. Thank you all.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
My thanks to all the three of you.
Nikita.
My thanks to all the three of you.
Thank you, guys. It was really nice.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hope to see you in person in college sometime. That will be great.
Yeah,
thanks for that. And we should end on that note. Hope to see somebody.
Yeah, hopefully all of us can meet again in person. Yeah.
KRUPA's like hope to see somebody in person. Yes, KRUPA. Okay, thank you very much and good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for bearing with us.
Yeah, absolutely our pleasure.
Wow.
Thank you.
It was very informative. Thank you.